how an OCT system will work. Basically, there is a superluminescent diode source in an OCT machine. This superluminescent diode, it produces 820 nanometers near infrared light. The near infrared light from superluminescent diode then passes through a coupler in the center. This coupler, the purpose of the coupler is it splits the light source into two halves. Half of it is sent to a reference mirror. The rest of the half is sent to the patient's eye. Now this light which is reflected from the reference mirror is then compared with the light coming from the eye. What happens to the light which goes into the eye? So part of it is absorbed by the tissues there or transmitted to the deeper tissues. Part of it is reflected back and part of it is scattered. The scattered light is gone. The reflected light which comes from this eye is compared with the light which is coming from the reference mirror. So there is a principle called interferometry by which an interferometer works, and this analyzes the light coming from the eye with that of the light coming from the reference mirror. So basically the interferometer collects the signals which are coming from the eye, and they are compared. The time delay and the attenuation of the signals are compared here, and then it is sent through a spectrometer into the computer. So when the signals are sent from here to the computer creates a real-time tomographic image, and the color coding what we see is just a false color coding. It's not the true color of the tissues there. It's just a false color coding. So by which we get a OCT tomogram report. So as you see here on the left side, there are different 10 layers of the retina. That is a histopathological picture. And on the right side, you can see the OCT picture. All the 10 layers of the retina, which are very crisp and clearly seen on a nice OCT, if done a nice OCT picture. So if you get a OCT report, you have to interpret it. What are the things we have to look when you want to interpret an OCT? One is we want to know what is the pathology. Second thing is we want to quantify it, because most of the retinal diseases which involve the macula are either macular edema or some other abnormal tissues which are pulling on the retinal tissue. So we need a quantification. So quantification and serial monitoring is very easy. As soon as we get all the details, and serial monitoring, it will, the machine itself shows you how much of edema is resolved or how much of it is increased. And that is not very important, and we did not learn specifically anything from that. But what is more important is we should be able to identify the pathology. What is the actual pathology which is happening there? That has to be identified. So before going into the abnormal report, let us see how a normal OCT picture looks. This is the normal OCT picture of the normal fovea. There are 10 layers in the retina, we all know, and we can see all the 10 layers here. As soon as you see the first glance of the picture, we get two bright, one on the top and one at the bottom. So the bottom bright white line which is there is RPE layer as well as the Bruch's membrane. RPE is the outermost layer of the retina, and the Bruch's membrane is the choroidal tissue. So RPE and the Bruch's membrane together form the bright white line which is there at the bottom. Just above that, you see a bright white line, a thin bright white line. This is the junction of the outer segment and inner segment of the photoreceptors. So this layer is the photoreceptor layer. Just above that, you can see one more bright line, but very little faint compared to the earlier one. This is the external limiting membrane. So you have the Bruch's membrane, you have the photoreceptor layer. This is the external limiting membrane. Then we have the outer nuclear layer, outer plexiform layer, the inner nuclear layer, inner plexiform layer. Above that, you have the ganglion cell layer. And above the ganglion cell layer, you have the nerve fiber layer along with the ILM. The normal OCT doesn't differentiate ILM and the nerve fiber layer. They are seen together. So these are the 10 layers of the retina. So when we are reading an OCT, when we are interpreting an OCT, we have to see all these layers. But to remember all the layers, to describe which layer has got a pathology is difficult. So we don't have to remember all the 10 layers. Basically, we should see at three important areas. What are the three important areas? One is the vitreomacular interface. Vitreomacular interface is nothing but the junction between the vitreous and the retina. This is the top smooth curve what we see. This is the vitreomacular interface. Second is the neurosensory retina. The rest 9 layers of the retina together is called as the neurosensory retina other than the RPE. Retinal pigment epithelium, as I said earlier, is the deepest and the first layer of the retina, which is strongly adherent with the Bruch's membrane. So in majority of the pathologies, that is seen along with the Bruch's membrane. So the rest of the retina is called as the neurosensory retina. These terms are very important because when we describe majority of the pathologies which happen in these interfaces. The next one is the RPE and the Brooks membrane. So 3 different layers are very important to identify the level of the pathology. So when describing an OCT, there are certain terminologies which are commonly used. The various terminologies, just go through the terminologies, but later once you see the images, we get a clear picture of what exactly they are. The first one is thick posterior hyaloid. Normally the vitreous which is attached to the retina is called as the posterior hyaloid. Normally it is not visible because it is a very transparent one, but certain pathologies such as age-related or age-related macular hole, or in other pathologies such as diabetes or vein occlusions where there is inflammation, this hyaloid can get thickened and it causes what is called as a vitreomacular traction. When the thickened hyaloid, it becomes like a thick membrane and pulls on the retina, on the macula, we call it as the vitreomacular traction. Second is edema. Fluid can be seen very clearly on the OCT, but there are certain different varieties of fluid cysts. It could be clear cyst, or it could be a cyst with few specks inside, or it could be a diffuse outer thickening, diffuse retinal thickening, as it looks like a spongy edema, like a fluid in the sponge, it gets swollen. Then there can be some hyperreflective material within the retina. So these retinal layers can have some amount of hyperretinal, either intraretinal or subretinal, whenever there is a pathology. And what do they signify? They are either hard exudates, or they are either blood, or it could be some sort of neovascular membranes, which commonly occurs in case of choroidal neovascular membrane. The next one is inner retinal opacification. Normally, as you see in the picture above, the inner retinal layers, the layers which are close to the vitreous are called as the inner retinal layers. They are partially refractive. Hyper-refractive. They are not hyper-refractive, but they are medially refractive. And in case of arterial occlusions, sometimes these become very opaque. These layers become opaque. So that is very typical of central retinal artery occlusion. Then retinal pigment epithelium, RPE, what we commonly say is nothing but retinal pigment epithelium. That is the deepermost layer of the outermost layer of the retina. Then subretinal fluid and sub-RPE fluid. This we have to understand very clearly. Subretinal fluid is nothing but fluid between the neurosensory retina and the RPE. It is not below the RPE. The term, as it indicates subretinal fluid, commonly we think is the fluid between the retina and the choroid, but it is not so. Even in case of detachments or in case of central serous chorioretinopathy, the fluid is sub-neurosensory retinal. That is all the layers except the RPE. Below this potential state, whatever you see, if there is fluid in this area, that is called as subretinal fluid. And sub-RPE fluid is below the RPE. Now this is the RPE. Any fluid below that is called as the sub-RPE fluid. Then pigment epithelial detachment. Pigment epithelial detachment is nothing but retinal pigment epithelial detachment. The dark line which you see here, this layer, whenever it gets elevated, this thick dark band, that is called as the pigment epithelial detachment. So whenever you see a OCT, at the first glance, you should look at these 3 areas. One is the vitreomacular interface. Second is all the 9 layers of the neurosensory retina. And the third one is the RPE layer, the Brooks membrane, and the choroid. So if you see all these in a sequence, we will not miss any of the pathologies which are happening there. So vitreoretinal surface anomalies. The number 1 is the vitreoretinal surface anomaly. So if there is any pathology which is happening between the vitreous and the smooth surface of this retina, we call them as vitreoretinal anomalies. These are nothing but epiretinal membrane or a vitreomacular traction syndrome, or it could be a thick posterior hyaloid which is causing attraction on these areas. The second one is presence of any abnormalities within the neurosensory retina. So the neurosensory retina may contain either fluid, which could be again either serous or blood, or it could have some deposits. Deposits in the sense hard exudation or abnormal deposits which can sometimes accumulate there. Or it could be some membranes which can happen because of chronic inflammation. Then comes the outer retinal layer and the choroid. The outer retinal layer and the choroid consists of the RPE, the Brooks membrane, and the choroid. So any pathologies which are happening in this area, for example, if there is fluid accumulation in the subretinal space, that is what we call as retinal detachment, or even in CSCR, that can happen. Even in optic nerve pit with fluid, you get a fluid accumulation in the subretinal space. And even in case of CNVMs, when there is a classic CNVM, the fluid accumulates in the subretinal space. And sub-RPE space, that is below the level of the RPE, the fluid which comes is mainly because of a CNVM or a pigment epithelial detachment. So once you know what are the different pathologies which can happen, once you know where it can happen, we can easily identify what exactly is the problem, what exactly is the pathology which is happening there. Now, as I said earlier, the basic abnormalities when you see at the OCT of macula are two. One is presence of fluid, second is presence of membranes. So if it is fluid at the macula, this fluid can be, we should first localize where exactly the fluid is, whether it is intraretinal, either it is subretinal, or is it sub-RPE. Intraretinal, as is seen here in this picture, there are large cystic spaces with intervening septae of retinal tissue. This is intraretinal accumulation of fluid. When you see such a fluid, we call it as commonly cystoid macular edema. Subretinal is when there is fluid in the, as I said earlier, the fluid, if it is there between the neurosensory retina and the RPE, then you call subretinal. Sub-RPE, when the RPE layer itself, this thick red band, it itself is elevated. Whereas in the other two, as you see above two pictures, the RPE is intact, fluid is there between that and the rest of the retinal layers. So here, RPE itself is elevated and there is fluid space in the sub-RPE space. That is nothing but a pigment epithelial detachment. So fluid can be these three different varieties. And then membranes, as I said earlier, the membrane could be either just an epiretinal membrane, or if the membrane is intraretinal or subretinal, as is seen in the second picture at the bottom, central one, that shows a hyperreflective area which is seen in the center. This is again a membrane, choroidal neovascular membrane, which is above the level of RPE. Now the bright red line which is there at the bottom is the RPE. So it has broken that and come into the sub-retinal space. That is a choroidal neovascular membrane. Or it could be sub-RPE. The RPE is still intact. There is a membranous tissue below the RPE. Then you call it as sub-RPE membranes. So basically fluid can be at all the three levels. At the same time, membranes can be at all the three levels. So if there is fluid at macula, what are the pathologies you should first think of? If there is fluid at macula, it could be vascular diseases such as diabetic retinopathy, retinal vein occlusions, or it could be a pseudophakic cystoid macular edema. It could be central serous chorioretinopathy, CSR, or it could be in case of myopia or rhegmatogenous retinal detachment, or it could be an AMD, age-led macular degeneration, or inflammatory fluids such as in uveitis, choroiditis, VKH, or posterior scleritis. And rarely we do see degenerative diseases where there is fluid accumulation at the center of the fovea. Now coming to diabetic retinopathy and retinal vein occlusions. So in diabetic retinopathy and retinal vein occlusions, generally there are 5 patterns of fluid which are commonly described. These are, one is spongy thickening, or it could be a cystoid macular edema. It could be a taut posterior hyaloid causing macular edema. It could be a traction on the foveal center, or it could be serous detachment as seen in these 3 pictures. So if you see a spongy thickening, a diabetic spongy thickening has an irregular elevation of the retina. There is accumulation of fluid here and there, and there are certain high reflective echoes seen in the layers of the neurosensory retina. The surface is normal, RP is normal, but the central neurosensory retina has got some fluid and few hard exudates. This is a typical of spongy thickening. What is the importance of this? As there is no much of a fluid at the center and there is edema away from the fovea, we can do focal laser in these patients. Second one is cystoid macular edema. As you see here, the RPE is intact, the surface is okay. There are large cystic spaces in the center of the fovea, and there are intervening septae in between. There is a specific pattern of fluid accumulation. This happens majority of the times in cystoid macular edema secondary to vein occlusions or uveitic or inflammatory. The third one is a taut posterior hyaloid. The posterior hyaloid is nothing but the thickened hyaloid or the vitreous, which has abnormal attachments on the retina. Now, once there is fibrosis or contraction of this vitreous band, it causes pulling of the retina on either side, causing thickening of the edema. So this is taut posterior hyaloid causing macular edema. So what is the importance of these two? If there is cystoid macular edema, intravitreal injections act better. And if there is a taut posterior hyaloid, these are the patients who benefit better with vitrectomy surgery, because these membranes, whatever injections or laser we do, they are not going to help. So they need vitrectomy. The fourth one is a tractional foveal detachment. Because of diabetic retinopathy, once it progresses to a proliferative stage, there are certain membranes which develop on the surface of retina. These fibrovascular tissues starts pulling the retina because of abnormal attachments at the vessels, and that causes a tractional detachment. So again, that is, if it is involving or threatening the macula, that's an indication for surgery. Then comes the fifth variant, that is the subretinal fluid. Diabetic and vein occlusion sometimes can cause such a type of edema, especially when the diabetes is very poorly controlled, or the diabetic patient has got coexistent severe hypertension or renal disease or severe anemia. Suddenly they present with gross loss of vision, and you see there is large amount of fluids like this. So this could be totally a subretinal fluid when the fluid is accumulating in the below the neurosensory retina, or it could be mixed when there is a subretinal fluid along with spongy thickening of the retina, or the clear fluid below can have sometimes hyperreflective echoes. These are some exudates. These are nothing but exudates which are developing there. And again, all these can happen in case of accelerated disease process of diabetes or hypertension. Moving on to the next subset is the retinal vein occlusions. The vein occlusions, as we know, produces severe edema right from day one picture. And here on the top, we can see a central retinal vein occlusion, and this is a supratemporal branch retinal vein occlusion. The central retinal vein occlusion has an edema where there are large uniform cystic spaces along with the intervening normal retinal tissue septae there, here and there, and they may or may not have subretinal fluid. This is very typical of a retinal vein occlusion. Whereas a branch retinal vein occlusion, you see more edema on the outer retinal layers. The cysts are irregular, and there is some amount of asymmetry, especially when the scan is taken from inferior to superior periphery. Half of the retina is non-edematous and the rest of the retina is edematous. And this is again a very typical of supratemporal vein occlusion. So if you see a picture like this without seeing clinically, we can diagnose that it is supratemporal branch retinal vein occlusion with cystoid macular edema. Moving to the next subset of disease is central serous chorioretinopathy. We know that CSR is nothing but fluid which accumulates between the retina and the RPE. So at the bottom picture, here it clearly shows the CSR. There is fluid accumulation below the retina, but above the RPE. You can see here RPE, the bright red line which we see is the RPE. So there is fluid in the subneurosensory area. Now this fluid has to be differentiated from pigment epithelial detachment. On the top, what we see is a pigment epithelial detachment. If you see the fundus photograph, there is a well demarcated orange lesion which is very close to the fovea. This is a pigment epithelial detachment, and majority of the times we get referral that as a CSR, but it actually is nothing but fluid in the sub-RPE space. And this sub-RPE space fluid, it doesn't require any treatment. Majority of the times it resolves spontaneously. And but majority of the times this coexists along with the case of CSR. In a CSR, sometimes we see multiple areas of RPE pigment epithelial detachments like this within the fluid. That is again a coexisting condition. But a PED like this, again, you should keep in mind, secondary diagnosis is age-related macular degeneration. So OCT also helps in follow-up of these CSR patients. This is the first visit, and this is the second visit. As you can see, the amount of fluid is coming down. So when you see such a picture after 20 days, we again call the patient for after 20 more days, because by then, up to 2 months, we can wait for complete resolution of the fluid. If it doesn't happen by then, we can plan for focal laser after an angiogram. Now, if such a fluid is seen in very elderly patients, maybe 60 or 70 years of age, we should not wait. This is again an emergency, because, and not an emergency, this is as an indication to refer to a VR surgeon, because in elderly patients, sometimes the fluid at this level could be because of age-related macular degeneration. For example, an extramacular or extrafoveal CNVM somewhere along the peripapillary area or along the arcades, there can be a CNVM, but there will be only a serous detachment at the fovea. That is not CSR, that is because of CNVM, an active CNVM. Sometimes tumors like hemangiomas also cause shallow CSR-like picture, where if you look carefully, you may find hemangioma somewhere in the subfoveal space, subretinal space, or somewhere around at the arcades also you can find these tumors once in a while. And sometimes, rarely, it could be a metastatic disease which has produced a serous detachment like this. So they all warrant a retinal surgeon evaluation. And some of the times when we see chronic patients of CSR, we see a clinical picture like this, where there is a lot amount of atrophy, retinal atrophy there. You have pigment patches. This is a chronic CSR. And if you do an OCT, you may find a large cystic space like this. So the presence of a large cystic space like this may warrant, it may look like it warrants immediate treatment. Actually, this is a degenerative cyst. If you see carefully here, the RPE is here and there is a large pocket of fluid in the center. The RPE, above the RPE and the fluid, there is some amount of retinal tissue which is there. So this is basically an intraretinal cyst. But if there is an intraretinal cyst like in cystoid macular edema, what we have seen earlier, there are some intervening septae here. So if there are intervening septae, that indicates it is not so chronic and that will respond to treatment. But if you don't find any intervening retinal tissue and you find a large cyst like this is basically a degenerative cyst and it doesn't respond, it will not respond to any treatment and there is no point in treating these patients. Next, if you move on to the next subset, that is myopia. A very high myopia, especially pathological myopia above -6 or -7, sometimes they develop certain maculopathy changes. These are, for example, it could be either chysis or it could be Foster-Fuchs spots or it could be a CNVM or it could even be a localized retinal detachment. So what are all these? A very high myope sometimes, as there is progression of the axial length of the eyeball, there is some amount of traction which happens on the central fovea. So because of that, because the sclera is expanding, choroid is expanding, the retinal tissue fails to expand as much as is required, then you get chysis of the retinal layer. There is splitting of the retinal layers as seen in this picture. You get a, between the retinal layers, there is an empty space. Then you get what is called as a chysis. This is foveal chysis. If it's sometimes you may get red hemorrhagic spots at the center of fovea. It's not clearly seen here. There is a small hemorrhage there. And that is nothing but a Foster-Fuchs spots. And if there is a Foster-Fuchs spots, it could either resolve spontaneously or it could develop into a CNVM. So if there is anything like that, if a patient with myopia comes with a sudden drop of 1 or 2 lines, we should always look for this. And if there is something, we closely follow these patients for development of a CNVM on progressive serial OCT scans. The next entity is sometimes they can develop a localized retinal detachment. Some of these patients, as you can see here, this RP has got a very concave configuration. Normally the OCT of retina will be either flat or slightly concave, but you can see it is almost like a ball. This is nothing because of the staphyloма. Whenever there is such a staphyloma, the retina starts with an age, there is thinning of the retina. They can develop a macular hole and fluids start accumulating in the center of the fovea. This is not a detachment which occurs because of a peripheral break, but this is a detachment which is happening because of a central macular hole. Fluid goes through it, accumulates in the subretinal space, and the retina starts detaching from the center. This is called as a localized detachment. So how do you identify them clinically? As you can see here, normally if it is a very high myope, we see a lot of tessellation. The background tessellation should be seen clearly. But these patients, if they come with a central scotoma, loss of central vision, suddenly, when you see clinically, you may not find any peripheral detachment, but you may find that there is lots of loss of tessellation at the posterior pole. As you see here, the peripheral retina has got tessellation, but the central macular area, there is loss of tessellation. When such a thing is there, you should always suspect there is foveal detachment and do a OCT. And OCT when done on this patient, as it is seen here, there is a macular hole and there is accumulation of fluid on the sensory retina, which is the foveal detachment, which has happened in a very high. And actually, this is post-operative surgery. And that's how the posterior tessellation should be seen. Then moving on to the next subset, that is age-related macular degeneration. The fluid at the, these are all the conditions where we find fluid at the posterior pole. So in case of dry age-related macular degeneration, as seen here clinically, there are multiple small drusen's here. And when you do an OCT, what we see is this picture. The RP which is there, it has undulating folds at the fovea, either isolated or continuous like this. Then we call them, these are the drusen's. The typical picture of the drusen is you find elevated RPE, and below the RPE, if it is a pigment epithelial detachment, as we have seen earlier, it should be clear fluid here. but there is no fluid. As we all know, drusen is nothing but accumulation of material in the Brooks membrane. So there won't be any fluid here. You find hyperreflective echoes because of this abnormal material accumulation. Now, how do we know if there is a CNVM and what are the different types? Now, by looking at this picture, what we see is the surface is fine. The retinal tissue, this is the neurosensory retina, clearly shows there are certain cystic spaces there, and there is some amount of hyperreflective material in the intraretinal tissue. And when we see the RPE, this RPE at the center is broken, and this broken RPE is the site through which the choroidal tissue, choroidal neovascular membrane, has come into the sub-RPE space. So basically, CNVM is nothing but a new membrane which develops from the choroidal vessels, which then breaks the RPE and the Brooks membrane, and then come into the sub-retinal space. And in the subretinal space, this membrane starts oozing fluid and blood, which gets accumulated around it, and that causes a central scotoma and loss of vision for the patient. So when this membrane breaks the RPE and comes into the subretinal space, we call it as classic CNVM. And why did we call it active? Activity is nothing but presence of fluid and blood in the retinal space indicates that this lesion is active. Now, when we gave an injection for the patient, now after injection, this is what we see after the first injection. What is this? The break is, this will be a long standing, this will not recover. But as you see, the membrane starts getting more and more hyperreflective. That is, it is becoming compact. And once it is become more and more hyperreflective, that means the lesion is getting more of scarring. And the edema which was there in the retinal layers and the blood which was there and slightly starts regressing. Still, there is some amount of fluid on either side of the lesion that indicates still there is activity. So lesion is getting scarring, but still there is some amount of activity. Because of this, we continue with further injections until we see that there is no activity. The next one is occult CNVM. What is an occult CNVM? As you see in this OCT picture, there is a thick RPE red line. This RPE red line is elevated, but there is no break in the RPE line. And sub-RPE space, we can see hyper-reflective irregular material there accumulating. This is nothing but a choroidal neovascular membrane, which is still below the level of the RPE. It has not affected the overlying retina, but it is there below the level of RPE and is bleeding there. So that's why clinically we might see some amount of hemorrhage that is in the sub-RPE space, and this is called as an occult CNVM. So today's, earlier classic and occult CNVM very important because PDT used to act better in case of classic CNVM compared to occult CNVMs, but nowadays whether it is occult or classic, the main stay of treatment is intravitreal injection. So whatever is the lesion, the treatment will be the same, that is intravitreal injections. Sir, here you can see the serial photographs where a large active CNVM after multiple injections finally has scarred completely. So what are the differences between these two lesions? When the lesion is active, you have a very large thickening at the center. There is a large amount of subretinal fluid. The lesion is very tall. As we keep injecting, the lesion starts becoming more compact and scarred. This is a scar tissue. Now, once the fluid is totally absorbed sequentially, and the last picture as you see here, almost there is nil fluid. So this is the time where we think that the treatment is sufficient. We stop there and we follow up this patient every 2 months from now. And whenever there is any new fluid developing in these sites especially, immediately that indicates that the lesion is getting active, and again we inject these patients with intravitreal anti-VEGF injections. Now this is another case. Interesting case because this looks like a bilateral CSR where there are two areas of pockets there, and there is some amount of RPE atrophy below and some amount of abnormal accumulation of tissues there. And when an angiogram was done thinking that it is a bilateral CSR, what we saw was only there is some amount of staining of the material which was accumulated, but other than that there is no active leak there. So this is not a CSR, and the OCT, once it is done, you can see there is a pocket of fluid along with the abnormal material which is accumulated. This is nothing but Best disease. So certain times OCT gives a very important clues to diagnose different rare conditions also. So that was all about the fluids which were there in the retina. Now let us see about the membranes. So what are the membranes? As we have seen earlier, it could be a retinal membrane, it could be a vitreomacular traction, or it could be a subretinal choroidal neovascular membrane. So when there is a PVD in very elderly patients, sometimes they'll end up with a macular hole. So what is a macular hole? Even before the OCT was invented, it was Gas who gave first the classification of macular hole, different stages of macular hole. This was his imagination, but later on, once the OCT was invented, all the stages of macular hole have been seen on the OCT. These are actually different patients in different stages from our patient pool, and which clearly shows the different stages of macular hole, how it develops. So there is a early PVD. Initially, what happens is there is accumulation of fluid in the center of the fovea, and this fluid starts expanding both horizontally and vertically up to the RPE, almost filling the entire retinal center. And once that happens, there is a PVD, and one end of the retinal tissue, the cap of it, is lifted up, and this is called as an operculum. And but at this stage itself, we call this as a full thickness macular hole, because there is loss of all the layers in the center. Then if there is a total PVD, the entire vitreous gets separated with some amount of retinal tissue attached to that, forming a full thickness typical macular hole. So this macular hole, not only OCT helps in the diagnosis of it, it also helps in the prognostication of the conditions. So we don't have to remember all these formulas, but if we draw a horizontal line, the A, what we see here is the horizontal line between the two maximum ends of the hole. This is the maximum diameter. B is the shortest distance between the two. C and D are the two horizontal lines which connect the tip of the B with A on either side. So when you do such a diagram, and then there are two formulas, hole formation factor and macular hole index. You don't have to remember, but the prognosis is better if C and D, the total of C and D divided by A is more than 0.5. Even that we don't have to remember. We just have to remember what we have to remember is C and D should be more and A should be less. If that is the case, then the surgery will be successful in closing the macular hole. So here again, the two macular holes, this is an acute one and this is a chronic one. Here, as you can see, the C and D are very long. You have long arms, C and D, and A is okay. So because the C and D are long, chances of this closure is high. Whereas as you see here, the C and D are very short, and it is almost, the retina is partly atrophic. And even in this case, if you do a surgery, chance of closure is less. At the same time, the visual acuity improvement may not be very good. So based on OCT, we can assess or prognosticate the condition in case of macular holes, and accordingly we can explain the patient before surgery and just pre-op and post-op picture showing how a macular hole closes. Then other subsets are, one is lamellar hole. Lamellar hole occurs especially when there is an epiretinal membrane. Sometimes this membrane causes there's edema of the central fovea, and those cysts, they coalesce together, and when they coalesce together, they form a large cyst in there and forming a lamellar hole. These cysts coalesce together to form a lamellar hole. Sometimes there can be a vitromacular traction causing a lamellar hole, which can progress to a full thickness macular hole. The other term is pseudo hole. What is a pseudo hole? Pseudo hole is also occurs especially when there is an epiretinal membrane. The central, there is actually no tissue loss in these pseudo holes. Because of the presence of membrane, there is accumulation of fluid here. There is some amount of spongy thickening which happens in the retina adjacent to the fovea, causing thickening of the layers on either side except the fovea, giving an appearance of a hole there. This is called as a pseudo hole. Pseudo hole is an ERM causing edema except at the fovea, causing a hole-like appearance. That is pseudo hole. There is actually no hole there. And finally, this is an epiretinal membrane. When there is an epiretinal membrane, usually it is not exactly an immediate indication for surgery, but whenever there is an epiretinal membrane, edema can develop, and it can, once the membrane starts shrinking, it can cause folds in the outer retina, inner retinal layers. Whenever the retinal layer starts folding like this, the vision starts deteriorating, and this, at this stage, it is again an indication for surgery. Again, vitromacular traction syndrome is a condition where the posterior hyaloid gets thickened. Once the posterior hyaloid gets thickened, but there is an abnormal attachment at the fovea, the vitreous starts separating all over around the fovea except at the fovea, and starts pulling at the fovea, where there will be cystic spaces developing in the fovea and subretinal fluid. Once there is such a condition, then again it can cause loss of vision because of this central fluid which is accumulating at the center of fovea. So those are all the various conditions which affects the fovea. by now we know all the diagnosis and all the fluids, the fluid and membranes which are there. And if there is time, there are a collection of pictures of macula where you can start trying and knowing the diagnosis of what exactly are these. Satish, if you can unmute.
Hello, Raja.
KCM sir.
It's a very, very good presentation. Only two points I want to add. One is OCT. Initially, like the evolution of OCT, the first thing we had was TD was time domain OCT. Then it was Fourier domain OCT. Then SD OCT. Then HD OCT, and now it is swept source OCT. For the just for a knowledge how it evaluated, and the sensitivity and the area of scan is increasing with swept source OCT. Like you can take a very large scan now, and also the depth is till this sclera now. Previously, the time domain OCT used to give only the macular area only, and not outside the macula, and also the area of the scan was less. Choroid also will not be seen. But now with the newer swept source OCT, it is seen. Another point I wanted to add is when you told that classic and occult, the classic and occult are usually described on an angiogram, a fluorescent angiogram, not by looking at the OCT. But retrospectively, we can look into the OCT and say that it's a classic and occult. But by definition, classic and occult OCT is by fluorescent angiogram. These are the only two things that I wanted to add. Otherwise, it was a comprehensive presentation, and we look forward. What are the other doubts other people have?
Yeah. So, I mean,
there is a question, Raja, in which what are the raster lines or the radial scans? Raster lines or radial scans?
Yeah. So actually, there are many types of scans which are there available on your OCT, but majority of them we just need a line scan to see. Raster lines are vertical, I mean, multiple horizontal scan from the arcade to the arcade. So it's sometimes the pathology won't be seen in the foveal center, and you may have a lesion which is there in the adjacent to the fovea and the macular area just below the arcade and things like that. So if there are any lesions which are there, you do a raster scan. It takes a wide area and there are multiple sections, and you can see all of them together. And the other one is cross-line or radial scans. These takes around 6 to 12 scans. I mean, like 360 degrees around the fovea. You take scans again, not to miss any specific lesion. Sometimes macular edema may be present infranasal to the fovea, or it may be present supranasal to the fovea, supratemporal to the fovea, and not in the center. So you do a radial scans, you get all the sections, and accordingly you will know where exactly is the edema. So there are many other different 3Ds. You can get a 3D scan.
There are protocols of scanning. There are different protocols like line scan, then cross line, then raster line, then radial line, then 3D imaging. Like that, it is NFOS. These are all protocols of acquiring the
different areas.
There was a question by Vinod Kumaran, how to diagnose HCQ toxicity with OCT, hydroxychloroquine toxicity with OCT.
Yeah. So in case of HCQ toxicity, if you go to the normal, one second, if you go to the normal letter, I can show you.
So నేను అట్లాగా సార్ మేము మా హాస్పిటల్ని ఐ డిసీజెస్ కి
unmute PL thing.
So we have to
mute.
Yeah. So when there is HCQ toxicity, basically it affects the inner segment, outer segment junction of the photoreceptors. So initial stages. So what you have to look at is this line. This line just above the RP and the Brooks membrane, there is a thin line, bright line. If it gets affected, if you don't see any line or discontinuity in this line, that is again a first stage of HCQ toxicity. Immediately we ask them to stop HCQ. And if it progresses on, you get the bullseye maculopathy, where there will be atrophy of the surrounding retinal tissue. All the outer retinal layers.
Outer
start
retinal layer.
atrophic. Yeah, all the outer retinal layers become atrophic, and you get thinning. They start to thin out. So this is how you can identify HCQ toxicity.
Yeah, lot of reference will come to you for people you are using HCQ for rheumatoid arthritis and finding out HCQ toxicity. So periodically you have to check color vision first thing. Early color vision can get affected, and then central visual field, then zero visual field, then on OCT. OCT, the outer layers of retina, as Raja has told, will get affected. So all these things, if there are any changes, then you have to refer to the rheumatologist regarding the toxicity of HCQ. How to avoid artifacts? See, avoiding artifacts with the new machines, I think even little movement of the eye also they will correct on themselves. So it's just focusing only is the main thing. I think the missions, newer missions, avoid artifacts on their own.
If you have a well dilated, most of the times we don't get any artifacts on OCT. As Dr. KCM said, there is an eye tracking device in that. Even if the patient moves the eye, it takes the area of interest and doesn't produce any artifacts.
How to differentiate serous fluid and blood in OCT? Raja, subretinal serous fluid and blood under the retina.
Yeah.
There's another question.
We have seen that earlier. Subretinal fluid is clear and it doesn't. Yeah, now I see the questions. Yeah, subretinal fluid is a clear fluid, which generally occurs either in the subretinal space or in the sub-RP space. Whereas blood is seen as hyperreflectivity. Blood has got some amount of reflectivity, like you see. The blood also has got has hyperreflectivity. Whichever in the location it is, you see it as bright red signals.
And also the signals are not attenuated if it is a serous fluid. If it is a serous fluid, the underlying retinal tissues will be seen. If it is serous fluid, if it is a blood, thick blood, then the underlying tissues will be attenuated. For example, the blood is present between neurosensory retina and retinal epithelium. After the hyperreflective thing, the RP and choroid layers will be attenuated if it is a blood. So these are the two things. Like what Raja told, clear and hyperreflectivity. Another thing, attenuation of signals below the fluid.
Then there is question from Dr. Murali Krishna from Tirupati. Is to differentiate between macular edema due to diabetes and post-op CME? Yeah, especially if the macular edema has in diabetic macular edema, you always look for any hard exudation. Most of the times, the retinal tissue will have some amount of hyperreflective echoes along with the empty spaces. That indicates that is a diabetic macular edema. Whereas a post-op CME doesn't have that. It has only the normal retinal tissue and just have multiple cystic spaces. Then you can say that it is a post-operative CME. The next question is from Vishnu Teja. Is enhanced depth imaging OCT useful for PCV? Yeah, PCV is a condition again, which is a very deeper tissue, which is where in the very deeper tissue. When you have an enhanced depth imaging, we get to the choroidal tissues better. So definitely it will help in diagnosis. But the most important diagnostic tool here is ICG. Do an ICG. These polyps, idiopathic choroidal, polypoidal choroidal vasculopathy. You see the polyps. And once you see the polyps on ICG, that is very typical. But whatever said and done, whether it is a PSC, PCV, CNVM or a regular CNVM, the mode of treatment is again anti-VEGF injections. But if we suspect PCV, we can add a PDT also in patients.
The next question is when to refer on clinical findings and OCT ARMD patients. So this is Raja.
Yes, carry on.
The symptoms of the patient is metamorphopsia, macropsia, micropsia. The signs are presence of blood and or blood or fluid or hard exudates in the fovea. And on OCT, if you see any break in the outer layers of retina, as Raja had told, you have to refer the patient to a retina clinic. So that is the answer. And the next question is, can you identify ischemic maculopathy in DR in OCT apart from FFA? It's not possible in regular OCT, but by angio-OCT, OCT angiogram, it is possible to diagnose macular ischemia. But otherwise, macular ischemia is diagnosed on a fluorescent angiogram, or we can use OCT angiogram to diagnose macular ischemia.
And there is one more point which I can say, especially in case of if there is a coexisting vein and arterial occlusion, then you can see, as in case of a small BRAO with BRVO, sometimes as I said earlier, arterial occlusion will cause opacification of the inner retinal layers. If you see it on the OCT, there is a dense reflectivity from the inner retinal layers, and that gives a suspicion that there is some amount of arterial occlusion also that can be added. So what is acute angle and obtuse angle in differentiating serous RT from PE? So I think we have seen in the presentation, one case I showed you where their PED is very acutely elevated PED. When the PED is vertically standing straight, then you call it as an acute elevation. That acute angled elevation PED is an indication for, again, IPCV. Whereas obtuse angle, like what the serous detachments we have seen in multiple, where there is neurosensory detachment I have shown, that is the normal subretinal fluid which occurs.
So which is more sensitive for hydroxyl visual field or OCT changes?
So again here, rather than saying which is more sensitive, I would say both complement each other.
Yeah,
The visual field and the OCT complement each other. Sometimes the scotoma may be so small, you may not pick it up, but OCT very early changes of the inner and outer segment.
Yeah, OCT changes
of the
compared to visual field changes.
Yeah.
If you
So
say that OCT changes are there, then a patient might develop field changes later.
Yeah.
Interpretation of grayscale OCT picture versus colored one, which is better?
Yeah, like it is said earlier, the gray scale gives better details. The minute details also are better seen with the gray scale compared to the colored picture. Colored picture is, I generally feel, is for the patient to see a report which is very colorful, he'll be happy. But generally we see only the gray scale, because gray scale gives minor details very clearly.
Is CSLO plus OCT combination mission be helpful in future, or OCT alone is enough, sir?
I feel that OCT itself is enough, but OCT angio, which has come now, is very useful, because as discussed earlier, the angio, we don't even have to inject the dye, but we get all the findings what we get on an angiogram. So if a combination machine has to be tried, OCT with the angio would be the best of all the present combined machines.
How to differentiate juxtafoveal telangiectasia and macular hole?
Yeah, juxtafoveal telangiectasia will be shown on the OCT. You see, one, there is atrophy of the fovea. Second thing, you find hyperreflective echoes on the parafoveal area. And third thing is, macular hole can be present in a patient with PFT. PFT has got two associations. One is macular hole, the other is CNVM. But what we commonly see is a PFT with CNVM. PFT with macular hole is a coexisting conditions. Whereas in macular hole, you get a full thickness loss of tissues, but you won't find atrophy of the adjacent layers, and you don't find any pigment deposition in the intraretinal layers. Presence of atrophy and the presence of intraretinal pigment deposition is a sign of PFT.
Satish, please unmute Dr. Satish. Phone, microphone.
There is a question from Dr. G.K. Gopalakrishna, sir. Is OCT angio an alternative to FFA in persistent CSR? No, sir. In CSR is the only condition. Still, we have to do an angiogram to find the leak. OCT angio cannot identify the leak on, identify the leak of CSR. So for a CSR, if it is persistent, FFA is mandatory. I think
good question, sir. Now CSR is a part of pachychoroidopathy. Pachychoroidopathy. It's a new term, sir. This new term came after I finished my fellowship and started practicing it after 10 years, sir. There are some conditions where people will have thickened choroids, like more than 200 microns. Normally is around 200 microns. People can have thickened choroids of 400, 600 microns. This condition is called pachychoroid. Pachychoroid people can present as pachychoroid RP epitheliopathy, means only just RPE changes like an early ARMD, or pachychoroid polypoidal choroidal vasculopathy, or CSR, or CNVM. So these four conditions can come in patients with thickened choroids. So the swept source OCT or enhanced depth imaging OCTs that have been described are good in diagnosis of these conditions. So all these four conditions are because of this all because of thickened choroid. There is thickening of choroid. Normal 200, 300. It is about 400, 600 choroidal thickness will be there. They present as either RPE epitheliopathy or RPE changes, or they can present as CSR, or they can present as idiopathic polypoidal choroidal vasculopathy, or they can present as choroidal neovascular membrane. All four. So OCT, especially the new OCT, SS OCT or enhanced depth imaging OCT, help in these conditions.
There is a question from Dr. Vinod. Does all OCT machines have grayscale? Yes, Vinod. All the machines have a grayscale, not only the higher end ones.
Satish, you are unmuted. You want to tell something? Satish.
Oh, this is a straightforward talk. What is there to say? It's pretty clear. You heard me, KCM?
Yeah. Satish sir, we can hear. Yeah.
There is a question from Gopal Krishnan sir. Is OCT angio an alternative to FFA in CSR? That has been answered. Almost all the questions have been answered.
So if we want to take the quiz of the images, there are certain images. We can know how much they have understood.
Yeah, you can show them. You are telling. Sir, can we proceed for another 5-10 minutes of images?
Yes, sir.
Sure.
Yeah. So Satish, you can unmute everyone.
Unmute or mute you want, Rajekar? Unmute everyone.
Unmute because they can answer this.
Okay.
80 people watching this.
Now here, volunteer to answer the number 1 and number 2. What could be the OCT? You see there.
Macular edema. Serious type of detachment laga. Detachment laga. ఇది కూడా cyst edema. ఇది intraretinal cyst లా అంటే ఎట్లా
Number 1 and number 2, what we see here, the surface is intact. RPE is only intraretinal layers in the form of cysts or subretinal fluid. These are most likely, number 1 and number 2 are most likely diabetic or retinal vein occlusions causing severe macular edema. Number 3. Yes. Number 3 is what we see again. The RPE is intact, the neurosensory retina is detached, and there is fluid in the below the neurosensory retina. So this is central serous chorioretinopathy. Number 4, as I said earlier, always look at the 3. The surface is normal. You can see that the RPE has elevated, and at the same time there are some fluid spaces in the retina. So presence of fluid here, elevation of the RPE, you should always suspect a CNVM here. Number 5. There are multiple cystic spaces with adjacent retinal tissue in between. RPE is intact and the surface is normal. So this is a typical cystoid macular edema. Such a cystoid macular edema can occur in case of uveitis, or it also can occur in sometimes vein occlusions. Number 6. Number 6 is, as you see, half of the retina, as I said earlier, is normal, and one half you see large cystic spaces and subretinal fluid. This could be a vertical scan of a supratemporal or infratemporal branch retinal vein occlusion. Number 7. As you see here, surface is fine. The neurosensory retina is fine. Only the RPE is elevated. You see that the RPE along with the rest of the retina is elevated. If the RPE is elevated, this is nothing but a pigment epithelial detachment. Then number 8.
This is, Raja, you can show that this is the acute angle at the
Yeah. If you see number 10, there was a query in the chat box. If you see number 10, you see there is an acute elevation of the PED. So this compared to this level, if you get such an elevation, you can call it
ఇందాక వచ్చిందిలే.
acute angle.
Number 7, what you see is an obtuse angle. PED is obtuse angle, whereas this is an acute angle. So presence of an acute angled PED is an indication for CNVM, whereas an obtuse angle PED like this is a normal serous PED along with subretinal fluid, and like this is a case of CSR with PED. Then
One more thing they asked previously, somebody has asked how to differentiate serous from hemorrhagic. One thing is one of these images, the RP is normal, like the underlying tissues are normal. So if the underlying tissues cannot be seen, then it is sub RP hemorrhage. Since most of them underlying hemorrhages are seen. Underlying PEDs, all the 3 PEDs, the underlying tissue can be seen. Retinal tissue can be seen. So they are most probably serous PEDs in this.
So number 9, as I said earlier, this is a large cystic space without any retinal tissue, RPE, and it is intraretinal. So this is basically a degenerative cyst. Number 9 is a degenerative cyst. Then coming on to number 11. Again, you can see here, if you go by rules, the surface is okay. The intraretinal, there is some amount of fluid cystic spaces. There is some amount of hyperreflective tissue there. And when you see the RPE, it is broken. At this point, the RPE is broken. And again, you can see the RPE here. So there is a tissue which is coming, breaking the RPE into the subretinal space. So this is basically a CNVM. This is an active CNVM. Number 12. If you see there in number 12, actually this is the retina. What you see a membrane here is an epiretinal membrane, but not exactly epiretinal membrane. It's a fibrovascular membrane, especially which occurs in diabetic or vein occlusions. Such a fibrovascular membrane at some abnormal point, abnormal attachment, it pulls the retina instead of separating. When it pulls the retina, you get a detachment below that. So this is basically a tractional detachment developing.
Yeah.
As I said earlier, this is a very high myope, a cup-like posterior staphyloма. There is a hole which developed in the retina and there is subretinal fluid. This is a macular localized central detachment. Number 13 and number 14 are high myopia with staphyloma with posterior pole detachment. Then number 16, if you see, number 15 is an active CNVM where RP is broken. There is a membrane in the retinal layers and the subretinal space, and there is activity because there is presence of fluid. Whereas number 16 is a CNVM which is scarred already. Membrane RP, you can see the scar here. The membrane is all scarred and there is no fluid in the overlying retina. So this is a scarred CNVM. Then number 17 is again drusen. There is an RP elevation. There is no fluid below except for hypertrophic material. So hyperreflective material there is again a drusen there. And number 18, if anyone can answer, special gift for them.
ఏమో కౌంటర్ అట్లా ఉంది కదా మెయింటైన్
Pit with the edema.
And optic.
Vishnu has typed optic pit with
Optic disc pit.
Basically an optic disc fluid which then seeps into the retinal layers and then it goes into the subretinal space. This is the typical way how the fluid
central serous. Okay, it is pit with the central serous retinal.
You should not call it a central serous.
So that ends the topic for today. There are any more doubts? We can take them now.
Okay.
Yeah. Satish sir,
Can you add anything?
Yes, a few of them have answered the question. Nikhil also answered. Very good. Now, what are the findings we need to see in OCT to consider to stop the anti-VEGF injection? This is a question, I think from Rajshekhar. Yeah, on OCT, as I said earlier, the membrane, the active membrane has have the clear margins, and there is edema in the retinal layers and subretinal layers. So once we see that the lesion becomes more compact, more smaller in size, and definitive margins, along with disappearance of fluid in the retina or in the subretinal space, then you can say that the lesion is scarring. But still, stage, we need to follow up these patients every 2 months for at least 2 years to totally stop anti-VEGF, considering totally stopping anti-VEGF injection. Till then, we need to follow them, and whenever there is any appearance of fluid, immediately we should start thinking of starting anti-VEGF injections.
Yeah, Anil, go ahead.
Raja, one more question.
Yes, sir.
Can we take the OCT image periphery? And Nikhil was asking.
Yeah, I saw the question. The
Yeah.
peripheral images are very difficult to take in. Actually, when we were doing Zeiss OCT, those days will have a movable arm. The major arm can be moved. So we used to ask the patient to look at one periphery, and we tilt, like in angiogram, how we can move the OCT arm. And we have taken some peripheral pictures, taken a OCT of a retinal hole in the periphery also. But it is not routinely possible, especially with all the new machines. It is not possible to get peripheral OCT.
How far it is useful?
Okay, sir.
And we can take images up to the arcades.
How far it is useful? For what conditions?
In what conditions? No, actually there are very few indications for that, sir. I would say there are certain conditions called extramacular CNVMs. Sometimes membrane can occur at the arcades, nasal to the disc, along inferior temporal arcades. There can be CNVMs. So these are the lesions. If you want to follow them on long term, we can just do the OCT. But actually, there is no much need of doing for peripheral OCTs.
Satish sir wants to add.
No, nothing like to add. So this is previously the early machines. They used to have something like 6 mm, 8 mm scans with the fovea at the center. Nowadays, the new machines, they are giving up to something like 16, and some are giving like almost 20, the latest machines. So what's advantage is just like as Raja is saying, if the lesion or it's inflammatory lesion or most often the AMD lesion or epivascular membrane or a bleed or something subretinal, a PED, the extension or if they are not extrafoveal, if they are not subfoveal or juxtafoveal or extrafoveal, if they are far away from the fovea, these and have a role. Otherwise, as it is, it's typically more time compared to macula.
Yes.
Dr. Rajshekar.
Yes, Anil.
Dr. Rajshekar. Anil here. Regarding HCQ toxicity, whether time domain OCT also can pick up the changes of what you said?
Yeah. The lesions can be picked up even on time domain OCT. The Zeiss, the area status OCT also can pick up these findings. But that layer has to be clearly seen, noticed. The picture should get a clear picture of the scan print we are taking. It should get a clear picture of the exact foveal center of the ISOS segment junction has to be taken. Then only can. There's a question from Vinod. How reliable is OCT in glaucoma? OCT in glaucoma we can discuss again. There is one more topic, I think.
Yes, we have one more topic.
Discuss. It is complementary to other tests. Definitely it is useful.
Raja?
Yeah.
Rajshekar?
Yes, sir.
Shall we done it?
There is one more question, sir. There is a question from Vishnu Teja. What is ellipsoid zone? Ellipsoid zone is nothing but the neurosensory retina, the shape of the neurosensory retina. When you see on a normal OCT, it is something like an ellipsoid. So while describing neurosensory retina, some of the authors, they use the term ellipsoid zone. It is nothing but the neurosensory retina.
Yes. Yeah. It's already 1 hour. I think we'll call it a day for today. Dr. Rajshekar, very nice presentation. A I don't agree with the last slide, the confusion of one man multiplied the number of people present. Today, we have at least 90 people watch our webinar. Number for us. I want to inform all the participants here. We are going to have every day at 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. From
5 o'clock.
5 to 6.
5 o'clock.
4 to 5 ప్రతిరోజు అరవింద్ వాళ్ళది ఉంది.
Arvind has 4 to 5. We'll start at 5:30.
So 5:30 start చేద్దాం మనం. 5:30 to 6:30 1 hour, and I'll keep posting you about the schedule. I've prepared the entire week's schedule. I think in the next 1 hour I can just post it to all of you. And please keep signing in every day at 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. on this Zoom Modern AI webinar. Thank you all for your participation. Signing off.
Very good.